Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. I just want to do this quick video in case you had a question about some of the classwork that we did this week. In particular, this is like that extra practice sheet of costs. It was where you were required to come up with a little bit of data on your own for variable costs, fixed costs, and such. So I thought I would just go over this in case you had a question. If you submitted the homework, I also put a couple of comments on your homework. So if you ended up with some specific questions, or if you made a particular mistake, just look there. A couple of things. The first part, everybody did pretty well on. Energy, of course, can be a fixed cost. Oftentimes you pay a certain amount a month for access to electricity, for example. You might pay a utility company, but at the same time, when you use more energy because you've increased the quantity of goods that you're producing, so say you produce cupcakes and you double the number of cupcakes that you produce, likely you will be increasing the amount of electricity. As soon as the increase in cost is connected to an increase in quantity, it is a variable cost, okay? And electricity or energy can be at the same time both fixed and variable. You could be paying that, in different ways. For B, the question had to do with what if energy is a fixed cost and the price goes up. We know that average fixed costs would shift, but they wanted to know about average total costs. If your fixed costs increase, just like if your rent increased, it does increase total costs and average total costs. However, your marginal cost does not change. Marginal cost never changes, never shifts when a fixed cost increases or decreases. Fixed costs are constant, so it doesn't affect marginal costs. Corn is a variable cost, and because it's an input, for example, a resource that might be used in ethanol or whatever other product, it is a variable cost because you need more of it in order to produce more of the product that you're producing. So it is a variable resource, variable cost. The cost of corn, if that were to increase as a variable cost, ATC would increase and marginal costs would also increase. In this case, your marginal costs increase only when variable costs change. Fixed costs for Marty's frozen yogurt, we know a couple of things. He's got workers, so we know that he's going to have some sort of fees for workers. And he also varies yogurt mix cups and so on. So workers are variable, yogurt mix and things like that, variable. But he also has, the refrigerators and machines, those are going to be fixed, okay? So we are given some information in this. We are given the fixed. And first, the first thing we're asked to do is really look at the marginal and total product. So I actually graphed it here. I didn't list all of the data, so kind of forgive me for that. But the idea is with the very first worker, we are told the very first worker that's hired makes a quantity of 110 frozen yogurt cups, okay? And then the second worker that's hired, we see a total of 200. So that's an additional 90. So I know the marginal product of the second worker is 90. The marginal product of the third worker is 70, okay? So I can see that very quickly after the first worker, I have diminishing marginal product, and I also have a total product that is increasing, right? So, the first worker adding 110 with two workers, 200 cups, three workers, 270 cups, and so on. You could write all of this out, but they ask for marginal product of the first worker, second worker, and third worker, so 110, 90, and 70. The shape of the curve has to do with the law of diminishing marginal returns, okay? So that's important to, why is it that marginal product declines? Marginal product declines and total product at that point may be increasing, but at a decreasing rate. That happens because of the law of diminishing marginal returns. What you all did in the paper chain activity is what is graphed and considered in number 2. And just keep in mind that this is a very different graph than the cost curves. On the y-axis of your product or production function, you have total product, and on the x-axis, you have additional workers. So the first worker, the second worker, the third worker. I should have labeled the x-axis, it's workers. and the y-axis is total product. When you go down to costs, any cost curve on the y-axis will have costs, and on the x-axis it'll be the product itself. We're interested not in the cost of every next worker, but we're interested in the cost of frozen yogurt cups. Okay, so very, very different type of thing. The third part was one that was a little bit tricky because you had to build some of the data. And I know my chicken scratch is really messy, but you have a couple of things. First of all, note you have a column that's for labor, and I would label this quantity of labor, right? We're interested in this being, for example, labor. We don't want to confuse this with frozen yogurt. So this is quantity, but the quantity of workers, right? So the first worker, the second worker, and so on, right? Every next worker produces a certain grouping of frozen yogurt. So we know with one worker, there's 110 that are produced, right? So 110 produced. With two workers, 200 are produced. And this is something we know from the product market, right? We did have to build our variable costs. Variable costs will always be zero if the product is zero. So if you make no frozen yogurt, your variable costs are zero because you haven't made anything, you haven't used any of your variable resources, you haven't made anything. As soon as the first worker's hired and now you're making 110 frozen yogurt cups, you have a couple of costs, right? One variable cost is your worker. So your workers are paid $80 each. One worker times $80, that's one of the costs. The second cost that's variable is 110 cups times 50 cents. So each cup is going to cost 50 cents. So you've got $55 for your cups, $80 for your one worker, a total variable cost of 135. We're told in the problem that the fixed cost is going to be $100. So that fixed cost is going to be, constant. Okay. So if we built a column here for fixed cost, this would be 100 all the way down. So add your variable costs and your fixed cost together, and you're going to get $235. So a lot of this is just built based on using the fixed cost given to us in the problem, and that's total fixed cost, total variable costs, which change every single time you're hiring another worker. You're producing with the second worker that's hired, you're not producing 110 cups, you're producing 200 cups. You're also hired a second worker. So you have now $160 worth of labor costs, and you also have $100 worth of cups, okay? So your costs will be $260, okay? So you're looking to establish your, variable costs from what it is that you're producing, okay? And then with 270, okay, 270, now you're producing 270 frozen yogurt cups. You're hiring 3 workers. Your variable costs will increase. So you have $240 worth of pay for workers, and then you have 270 cups times 50 cents each, okay? So you can see what's happening to your variable costs, right? They're going to be increasing and increasing, your total variable costs increasing and increasing. When you go to figure out your average variable costs, you're going to need to divide these figures, the total variable costs, by the number of product, okay? One other thing, when you go to do your total, remember you're doing total variable plus total fixed, okay? So that's pretty straightforward. Once you know 2 of these, you'll always be able to learn the third. And the other thing is for your marginal cost curve. Marginal cost curve is the change in total cost, okay? So you're looking at the change in total cost going from $100 of fixed cost to $235 fixed and variable costs, going from $235 to $360. So you're looking at the change in total cost, but you're also dividing that by the change in quantity. So when you hire this first worker and you go from 0 to 110, it's $135 of change in total cost, right? You've got an additional $135 of costs when you hire the first worker, but you also are dividing that by 110 frozen yogurts. So your marginal cost for every next of these 110 yogurts will be $1.23. And then you do the same thing when you look at what is the change in total cost over the change in quantity, which is now 90, you've got to do your math to put this, next one over 90, and you're looking at the difference between 260 and 235, okay? I hope that that's a little bit more clear. It was a little tricky. You could be graphing this, and if you graph this at home, you'll see that, you'll kind of get that pattern. And if you do your number 4, right, so we'll look at how number 4 might be, where you can figure out some of the cost curves that are averages. For total cost, you're just going to divide your total cost by 110 or 200 or whichever. Variable cost, you would divide the dollars of your variable cost by 110, 200, and so on. Your fixed costs will continually get smaller and smaller and smaller, $100 divided by the various frozen yogurts. So, once you have your average variable, average fixed, and average total, you can also look at where is the minimum point for your total costs. And I'll see if I can showcase that to you. Let me just see if I can go to the next. Let's see. Okay. There we go. Move down a little bit. Sorry. This is it. Okay. So, your data for the very last section might look something like this. You have your variable cost, you have your total cost, you have your average fixed cost. By the time you're producing 330 frozen yogurts, it's only costing you 30 cents in total fixed cost, but your average variable costs, are increasing. Okay, so you can kind of see that, and eventually that's going to be an interesting cost curve. And here's your total cost. Okay, so I guess decreasing and then increasing. This is pretty accurate. Okay, this is a pretty good average variable and average total cost curve. But your minimum average total cost would be right here at $1.76. That's kind of the minimum point of your ATC if you're graphing this. And when you are at $1.76, you would be producing 270 frozen yogurts. Okay, that's the ATC minimum. Okay, I hope that helps. I will see you in class.